Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about our comparison of Hercule Poirot and Sherlock Holmes. This is from an article from Community Archive, agathachristie.com by Rounak Ghosh, and talks a little bit about Sherlock Holmes uses clues to solve his crimes, but Poirot never really visits the crime scene. He uses his intuitive nature to find out who the culprit is. Holmes would rather solve more crimes than Poirot, but as far as who's the better fit for the job, then Poirot is the better. Holmes also uses drugs to stimulate to help him with his crimes. Both main characters, Holmes and Poirot, use the powers of intellectual deduction to solve crimes. Both also are attended by assistants whom they underestimate and verbally abuse. Both are also intellectual snobs. Holmes is a cocaine abuser and a scientist, while Poirot is just a natural at deduction. Doyle's novels are set in England, while Christie has her characters traveling wherever crime may be. Murder on the Orient Express, Murder in the Mesopotamia, Murder on the Nile, all take place in the Middle East. Both authors are killed off. They're serial detectives and wrote books with other characters. Those of Miss Christie, such as Miss Marple, gained more popularity among readers than Doyle's other books. In literary circles, Doyle is considered an author with a capital A, while Christie was always thought of as merely a commercial successful writer. I personally prefer Christie because her secondary characters are more than just stage dressing for the great man to pontificate before. This is a comment by a reader. Could be a student just like you. Uh, Shafra Shamaran. She says Holmes uses drugs. He doesn't need to indulge when on a case, instead smoking shag tobacco. Poirot has his own luxuries and vices. He's fond of good food, fashionable yet uncomfortable shoes, and Russian cigarettes. It's hard to compare the two on a literary level because Poirot usually appears in novels while Holmes generally appears in short stories. In The Hound of the Baskervilles, he's more of a side character, appearing in the beginning and the end. Personally, I find both very enjoyable. From both, I get a sense of England at their time, language, and culture. It's the fact that Poirot cares greatly for the human element. He studies human nature. He makes his stories perhaps more entertaining. Holmes is brilliant and a great performer, but he's cold and analytical, with only Watson to throw warmth and feeling into the story and prevent it from just being a puzzle. Whereas Poirot and Hastings are sympathetic, emotional creatures, not to mention the wonderful cast of characters around them that truly draw us into the story. It ceases to become merely a case, a question, a puzzle to be solved, and becomes instead a human drama. From Muriel N., Catherine Edmond said, Poirot by all means. He's analytical and deductive, but also emotional, with a sense of humor. Holmes is arrogant and humorless. I can't stand him. Catherine, if you call Sherlock Holmes arrogant, you have to admit Hercule Poirot is more than arrogant. No, I'm not playing a tit-for-tat game here. You have to understand that I'm saying, after reading many Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot books, coming to a broader argument, we are here to debate who is a better detective, not who is a better person. If I were to answer that, I would say Sherlock Holmes is better. Let me explain why. I hope I would have no serious objections if I say that the method of investigation used by a detective should be suitable for identifying the perpetrator, whoever he is and wherever he is at the moment. Sherlock Holmes easily wins against Hercule Poirot again here. So why does Sherlock Holmes do? He first talks in detail to the person bringing the sequence of events wanting explanation, visits the scene of the mystery, looks for any forensic clues, analyzes what he finds, traces the unknown, unseen characters, puts his findings about their movements to all of them, and thus jolts the guilty into a confession. This is, in a way, trouble-free, because you need not rack your brains about conflicting testimonies from different characters. You get to see the truth directly. For only those people who don't understand and appreciate the science of forensics, Sherlock Holmes appears as unrealistic, and or Hercule Poirot appears as more realistic. On the other hand, Hercule Poirot's way of reconstructing the crime is suitable only when the perpetrator is within the confinement of the investigation, be it in a house, plane, ship, library, railway coach, or anything. If the criminal is an outsider, as is more often the case in Sherlock Holmes' adventures, and by no means an impossibility in real life, Hercule Poirot would be in a soup for sure. Notice that whenever Hercule Poirot needs to do something outside the confinement, like doing background check, gathering information, tracing people, there's always somebody ready with the objective, reliable, and accurate info on a platter for Hercule Poirot. I often wonder how Agatha Christie fans never realize this. Whereas Sherlock Holmes, too, uses outside agents to help him, but only in situations when he needs to observe the goings-on at more than one place simultaneously. And even then, he tells his agents what exactly to do, meaning it is his brains that does the trick. The only conveniently direct the suspicion back to those inside the confined area, Hercule Poirot asks seemingly logical questions like, whose word do we have for it that there was a man in the corridor? Mystery of the blue train. What evidence do we have for it that it was left in the drawer last night? The submarine plans, etc. In fact, Hercule Poirot's logically suspecting and concluding that the lone testator to anything in the plot is most likely a liar itself, based only on this assumption that valid in a situation where no outsider could have been involved in the affair. And yes, a detective simply ought to be in the midst a lot of travel, action, and thrill and adventure. I would say that a person who feels he can detect without visiting crime scenes is but lazy. But mind you, this is not to say that no mind work need be involved. Frank from Queensland, Australia writes, it's hard to pick between the two detectives. The parallels between Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot are interesting. When Agatha Christie first created her most famous detective, Hercule Poirot, she made no bones of the fact that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's detective, Sherlock Holmes, was a major influence on her work. From this perspective, perhaps Holmes was unknowingly a mentor, guide, and inspiration for the rather vain Hercule Poirot, a trait very much part of Holmes' personality too. In her autobiography, Christie says, at that date, I was well steeped in the Sherlock Holmes tradition, so I considered detectives. Not like Sherlock Holmes, of course. I must invent one of my own. I reviewed such books as I had met and admired in books. There was Sherlock Holmes, the one, the only. I should never be able to emulate him. Both detectives had chivalrous sidekicks who were stereotypical British gentlemen. While Holmes had his able Dr. Watson, Poirot enjoyed the company of Captain Arthur Hastings. Apart from, of course, chronicling the adventures of their famous companions, they also assisted them in field work, sometimes taking the law into their own hands. Watson and Hastings suffered in their role as innocent stooges, as both Holmes and Poirot were conceited and downright rude when in their most uncharitable moods. Vanity was an essential ingredient in the makeup of both Holmes and Poirot, and none could vouch for this more than their two assistants. This vanity was a manifestation of their supreme self-confidence, abetted by years of exercising the little gray cells. And yet there have been times when this confidence has been shaken. The Yellow Face, set in Norbury, and the Chocolate Box stands as the rare failings of Holmes and Poirot, respectively. At one point, Poirot asked Hastings, if at any time you think I'm growing conceited, you shall say to me chocolate box. It is agreed. Just as Holmes once said to Watson, if I should ever strike you that I am getting a little overconfident in my powers, kindly whisper Norbury in my ears. The similarity in both these cases is only too obvious to miss. Of course, along with a stooge assistant, all detectives need a policeman they can outwit. So while Sherlock Holmes had Inspector Lestrade, Hercule Poirot had to contend with Scotland Yard's Inspector Japp. In spite of their self-importance, both Holmes and Poirot were content to let the grateful inspectors take all the credit for solving the cases. For the two detectives, the satisfaction and success of solving a tough case was a greater reward than any public appreciation. Another interesting parallel is that Holmes and Poirot had strong feelings not only for one woman, both of whom were strangely on the other side of the law. While it was Countess Vera Roskakov for Perot, Holmes was attached to Irene Adler, whom he invariably mentioned not by her name but by the sobriquet of the woman. However, these relationships do not go far, and the two ladies feature in not more than 2 or 3 adventures. A further striking resemblance is their choice of vocation after retirement, which were far removed from the world of crime that the two detectives had been accustomed to. While Holmes famously took to beekeeping and wrote books on the same, Perot kept himself busy through the cultivation of a vegetable garden. If you have to pick between the two, it would be Perot by a whisker. Sherlock Holmes versus Hercule Poirot from Books of SuspenseWeebly.com. Sherlock Holmes is a classic detective who used his deduction to solve crimes. It is no surprise that Agatha Christie, the famous mystery writer, used him to write some of her aspects on Poirot, her detective. In this post, I'm going to talk about some of their similarities and differences. Which one is better? Who do you think will solve a case the quickest if you put it together? Let's start with a look at Sherlock Holmes, is known for his classic hat, pipe, trench coat, and magnifier. Poirot wears a hat, a suit, carries a cane everywhere, and oh God, don't forget about the mustache. Both Poirot and Holmes look very intriguing, but the question is who wore it better? Sherlock Holmes looks very classic and serious for his job. Although his outfit is over the top, it still looks like he's going to get down to business. The pipe and trench coat also make him look mysterious, giving this character a three-dimensional look even before you flip the pages. As for Poirot, he looks more comical and just plain over the top. It gives him a lighter feel and a lot more friendly and enjoyable, like something that you would read one late night while it's raining. Poirot is just so suave. I mean, look at him, the cane, the mustache, and the suit. I don't know if I should be jealous of his fashion sense or laugh about how great it suits him. He looks like a human version of Mr. Peanut from the Planters commercial. It honestly makes me expect a funny satire of a mystery novel, which is not what I think Agatha Christie wanted to put out. With that said, Sherlock wins a point. Who is more intelligent? Here we have two masterminds, probably the two best detectives ever. Sherlock uses clues to solve his crime. Poirot never visits the crime scene. He uses his intuitive nature to find out who the culprit is. Poirot is definitely better at understanding people than Holmes. However, Holmes is a better chemist and good with scientific problems. Poirot was able to solve Mr. Ratchett's case without any true evidence, clues, connections, or tracks. Sherlock Holmes relies more on evidence than Poirot. Poirot can also sense when danger is coming. He knew from the second he saw Mr. Ratchett that he wasn't a good man. Holmes would solve more crimes than Poirot, but as far as who is better fit for their job, then Periot is better. Holmes also uses drugs to help him with his crimes. Poirot never uses drugs in his story. These two are at completely different perspectives at solving crimes. It's honestly like comparing apples to oranges. Sherlock uses science and technology. Poirot uses psychology and logic. It's hard to choose a winner in this division, but I have deducted that Poirot is the winner. Which character is better written? It's time to answer the final question, the mother of all tiebreakers. The question that beats all other questions, which character is better written? Both Arthur Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie are great authors who have dedicated themselves to mystery. Poirot is a great character who dives into a deep world of analysis. He knows the human nature so well, he doesn't even need to look at a crime scene to figure out who the culprit is. He is witty, diverse, and can manipulate the answers out of anyone. His enriching novels make you wonder how accomplished such deductions. At times, he is honestly quite bland, sometimes especially in the novel. I felt as though Christie focused more on the case and how intelligent he was than who he really was. The character development was very slow in Murders on the Orient Express, and it was one of his most acclaimed novels. Poirot is definitely intellectual, but the chemistry and humor I expected from him just wasn't there. He really looked like a bland copy of Sherlock Holmes to me. I have to admit the story was well written, but as for the characters, it isn't perfect. Sherlock Holmes is different, however. He gives off a very mysterious feel without being too preachy about it. His sidekick, John Watson, also gives him an added likability and chemistry. Just watch the show. Sherlock also falls into a dark place with his drug use and his inability to connect with others. Because Sherlock's stories were told from Watson's point of view, it gives him a vague view, what gives readers wanting more. The fact that Holmes was better developed in only 4 novels and 56 short stories in comparison to Poirot's whopping 33 novels, 1 play, and 50 short stories says a lot. Okay, so that's quite a bit of compare and contrast from a variety of different speakers, and I hope this helps you out with your research paper.